Ah yes, the Animaniacs. It feels like it was just yesterday that the chaotic trio rose from the grave for an exciting new reboot of their beloved show, ready to entertain new generations with their wildly zany antics for years to come.
Sorry, you're cancelled.
Alright, considering this is a reboot, I guess it'd be a good idea to quickly sum up my thoughts on the original Animaniacs from the 90s. Don't worry, this won't take long. So, original Animaniacs. It's a classic, a banger, the chef's kiss of cartoons. Animaniacs was a show that became special and beloved because the makers just wanted to have fun with it and explore the endless creative ideas of a variety cartoon show. There were tons of segments and characters, and you never knew what to expect from an episode. There could be 2 to even 7 skits in one episode, and it always just depended on what ideas the creators had in mind when they were making them. It always felt fresh, and that feeling of your favorite segments coming up again was fantastic. So, how does Animaniacs 2020 fare? This has to be one of the most divisive shows to come out in the past decade or so, because nobody can agree on what's good or bad about it. Specifically when it comes to the writing, everything that can be brought up about the writing in any of the episodes in any of the 3 seasons will, and I do mean will, be extremely divisive. There's so many ups and downs, positives and negatives, back and forths, it's just ridiculous. Animaniacs 2020 is ridiculous. So let's talk about the show in its entirety now that it's over. I mean canceled. Okay, how about we start with what everyone agrees is good? Just kidding, even this is a decisive among fans. Nobody can agree on anything, I'm not kidding. Okay, the animation. The animation is phenomenal. It's fluid, it's colorful, the designs of the main characters are great and extremely expressive. There's a lot of blink and you'll miss it moments when it comes to the animation, a lot of special bits and gags in the background and the foreground. You really just have to keep your eye open for little fun things that the animators decided to put in there. And you can tell a lot of hard work was put into the animation to make it as fun as possible. Although sometimes the animation can get noticeably stiff, especially when it comes to season 2 and 3, which is kind of weird. I guess they really put all their budget into season 1 because season 2 and 3 are not nearly as good when it comes to the animation standpoint. At least when it comes to the main animation. When it comes to different types of animation, that's when things get really creative in all 3 seasons. I love, and I know everyone else will love, the different animation styles used for specific segments and songs. They added even more life to the show. Although I do say the main problem with the visuals in all 3 seasons is the background characters. Like, the background characters are kind of over-designed and mostly just ugly. It's kind of distracting to see a bunch of human characters that look like they're supposed to be special in some way, but they're really just over-designed. I don't understand why they did that. And because of how over-designed they are, it becomes really apparent when you see the same background character designs in other places in the show. But you know what? Other than the background characters, the visuals of the Animaniacs is pretty great. The characters are a bit of an odd case. While the Warner siblings and Pinky and the Brain feel like their old selves, they definitely don't act exactly the same.
Make it a devil's food, Ted Pinky. Because I am going to put her through hell.
I guess being dead for 22 years probably has something to do with it. Yakko isn't as talkative as he was in the original Animaniacs, and he's a lot more reserved, and he's kind of less of a, like, the one who yaks. He's more like the one who stands back, which we'll get to more in that in a second. Wakko was always more of the wild Warner sibling compared to the other 2, but in this one, he's more of the gross-out sibling. I don't know why they decided to introduce gross out in the new Animaniacs. It's like, that was never really a thing in the original. They didn't have to rely on gross out, because gross out's not funny. But you know, yeah, they decided to do that with Wakko, which is, that's a thing. Then for Dot, for some reason, she seems to just hate men now, which was never really part of her character. She was always, you know, well, they say in the theme song now that she has wit, but it's not like she didn't have wit back then. Just saying she's cute was just kind of a visual point of reference. Like, really, when it comes to Dot Warner, she's more like the original Yakko than Yakko is. She does a lot more of the talking, and really when it comes to her having wit, all that really means is that she's a lot more sarcastic and aggressive. So as you can tell, the Warner siblings are a little bit off in this show. But what's the most off about them is that they aren't chaotic toons anymore. It's like they forgot that they have omnipotent god powers and they just kind of choose to run away or talk out their issues. It's like they're incredibly downplayed to the point where they're just weak. In the original, they were smart and witty and always one step ahead of their adversary. Now, they barely fight back. It's like they always rely on someone else to come to their rescue, even though they're cartoon characters. They should be able to take care of themselves. And they did in the old days. I mean, did you see how chaotic they could get back then? Now it feels like the Warner siblings are the people that they used to like drive insane back in the original series, where they don't know what to do and they try running away from other people causing them chaos. It's weird. I don't understand why they did this. Like, it just makes the Warner siblings seem a bit more pathetic than they probably should be. Now, when it comes to Pinky and the Brain, Pinky feels the most like his old self compared to the, like, rest of the cast that they brought back for this show. He's still, you know, dumb but means good in his heart and cares about Brain. Now, when it comes to Brain, back then, he was not as emotive as he is now, because now, he's a lot more expressive and a lot more emotive. There's a lot of expressions that he goes through in this show. And honestly, I kind of prefer this one. Back then, he just kind of talked like this. Come on, Pinky, we're going to take over the world. You've angered me. Don't make me hurt you. Something like very no expression in his voice. But now he has a lot of expression and a lot of emotion in his character, like, acting, which is great. I think, for me, I'd say it's better than the original. And I'm just talking about Brain's character acting. I'm not saying anything about the writing yet. We'll get to that later. But yeah, Pinky and the Brain, they were probably better than the Warners in the reboot. They were actually pretty fun most of the time. There's also other characters like Ralph, Narita, Dr. Scratch and Sniff, Niels Needhart, which just show up on the regular throughout the series, and they're fine. They're not really special in any ways. I mean, Dr. Scratch and Sniff only showed up once, like in season 1, and then barely kind of shows up a little too much in the other 2 seasons. This show did a really bad job with the balancing act, and again, we'll get to that more in a bit. And when it comes to the characters and their voices, the voice actors did a fantastic job across the board. You can tell that they really put their heart into giving these characters tons of life, or at least as much of life as they could.
This is the problem with being rich. Your only other nickname is Dick?
But when it comes to other characters from the original, a lot of them were cut out, which really hurts the variety aspect of the show, because really most episodes are just 2 Warner sibling segments and then a Pinky and the Brain segment in the middle, with sometimes other different types of segments, like swapping out one of those, usually one of the Warner segments. It can get repetitive really fast. And you know what? I'm just gonna say it. Hello Nurse should have been the CEO of Warner Brothers in the show. That would have made perfect sense and would have been a natural evolution of her character. We know she's very intelligent and she would have been way more interesting compared to Nora, the new CEO, whatever her name is. The new characters and segments that they did use to replace the originals don't really hold a candle to them, but how about we go over a few? And by a few, I mean the few I remember for better or for worse. Okay, firstly, there was the Gnome in People's Mouths, a segment that shows up a few times in the series about a gnome who climbs out of people's mouths to say what they're too scared to. The gnome speaks up for them when they can't. This segment, sucks. It's not funny, and the best part about it is that the gnome is voiced by John DiMaggio, who's a great voice actor to listen to. But every time the segment showed up, I just braced myself for dullness, and honestly, I can't remember if any of the gnome stuff actually made me laugh. It really was just a nothing. It was just nothing. Another recurring segment of the show was something called Starbox and Cindy. The gist behind it is that a race of deadly alien beings travel across the universe to wipe planets clean of sentient life by killing everything on it, basically. So their commander named Starbucks comes to Earth first to make sure that there are sentient beings on the planet before pressing a button to start the invasion. Unfortunately, before he does, he's found by a little girl named Cindy who treats him and cares for him like a smaller family member slash toy, really. Which is unfortunate for him because she constantly gets in the way of him being able to press the invasion button. It's very reminiscent of the classic trope of evil character for one reason or another has to spend time with a pure-hearted character who changes them for the better over time. And you know what? I actually kind of like Starbucks and Cindy. It's not the funniest segment, it's actually a little slow at times, but honestly, it always felt like a breath of fresh air compared to the usual Warner and Pinky and the Brain segments, because it was very quiet, and the actress for Cindy apparently just improvised most of her lines, so she's just speaking nonsense like a real kid. It's a bummer the show was cancelled because a proper conclusion of Starbucks and Cindy didn't happen, but it was clear that Starbucks was getting attached to Cindy. And I'm pretty sure what would have happened is that he finally gets a chance to press the button, but doesn't because he doesn't want to kill Cindy, although I do wonder how he would have stopped the rest of his species from destroying Earth. Ah well, for what it was and what we got, I still enjoyed Starbucks and Cindy enough. Like, the segment was a fair bit enjoyable. As far as reoccurring side segments goes, I think those two were the only ones. I can't remember any others that showed up a bunch of times, which either means they're just that forgettable or my memory is even worse than I think. It can also mean that the one-offs I'm about to talk about include what actually were recurring segments too, but considering they didn't leave much impact on me, and in this show you just need to show up twice to be considered a reoccurring segment, it really doesn't matter. Anyway, there are other one-off segments throughout the series that are very hit or miss. Okay, there was this one-off segment, I think in Season 3, called Murder Buddies, which was actually pretty hilarious. It was just consisting of a family's dog, like literally killing them off one by one throughout an episode. And it was actually just funny how ridiculous of an idea it was. Like, the dog leads them out in a way that seems so family friendly and like kind and cute, and then he like leads them to danger and then they die. It's just I don't understand who came up with the idea, but it's funny. It was funny. Then there was another one-off segment called What Is That?, in which the Warners investigate something called a bang, or I think they called it a bang, and then there was an alien. It was funny. I liked it. I think the best part about it was the narrator's body is represented by just a bunch of subtitled words. Like, he runs away and you can just see him screaming like, ah, but you can see it's like running across the forest and it's supposed to be him. Like, that's funny. Then there's Masterpiece Theater, which I actually think might have been a reoccurring segment, but it only happened twice. It was basically a segment in which Dot Warner gives a very dramatic representation of a math question. Those were actually kind of funny. I like those. Especially the one about the apple, because like the apple thief, it was very needlessly dramatic, which was actually kind of funny, especially when it all just ends with the math question being answered. That's a funny idea. Over-dramaticism can be done right, and they did it right. One of the better one-offs that I'm actually surprised was as good as it was Things That Go Bump in the Night, which was just a bunch of monster eyes in the darkness, like talking to each other, and they have some very just casual interactions. There was an adult joke in the segment, which is actually kind of hilarious, where one of the monsters is like,
"Whoever's licking me better stop."
And then another monster says,
And whoever's licking me better keep going.
That made me laugh really hard I just did not expect that. That was a really funny joke. Another funny part is that I guess what's supposed to be representative of a Cthulhu-like monster just shows up much bigger than the others, and he's like,
"I've been resting for a millennia, but soon my time will come."
and he starts laughing, and then he falls back asleep. I like this segment a lot. 2 thumbs up from me. And then another one that I remember was a segment called Everyday Safety. And Everyday Safety was, it was fine. I think what it was just the Warners explaining how to be safe in a very non-realistic way. It was just a bunch of nonsense, and what ends up happening is they say, here's how to be safe when this thing happens. And then they do a bunch of things that seem like they wouldn't help, but actually does help them be safe. So, but it wasn't really all that great. It was fine. There are a lot of random segments throughout the show, and these were just a few of them that I could remember off the top of my head. But they're not really enough to keep the default 2 segments, being the Warners and Pinky and the Brain, from becoming stale. Because I'm pretty sure every single episode features the Warners and Pinky and the Brain. And it can, like I said before, it does get a little bit repetitive, even with the side segments in those episodes. But you know what? Some of those side segments are actually pretty great, like genuinely hilarious. Now when it comes to the music and songs, there's some of the best parts of the show. This stuff is top-notch, and I really hope this isn't as divisive as everything else, but I know it is, because everything about Animaniacs 2020 is extremely divisive. But anyway, the songs, especially in Season 2, for some reason in particular, are amazing. Reboot It, Christopher Columbus, The Bayou Tapestry, Conceive of Yourself, Magna Cartoon, Yakko's Big Idea, A Brief History of History. I could keep going. The songs are shockingly spectacular. In fact, even the worst of the songs were just passable. Nothing bad. What's even better is that quite a few of the songs are accompanied by their own unique animation, so they feel even more special, and it probably explains why they're even better than they probably should be. Now we get to the writing. The most controversial, divisive, and unpredictable aspect of the Animaniacs reboot. You get a sense of what it's like from what I pointed out already, but there's so much more to it. Too much more to it. Okay. So when it comes to the writing, I think, honestly, it's fine. It is just fine. It's not great. It's not horrible. It's just enough of both, honestly, to be considered fine. There is a lot to dislike and a lot to love about the new Animaniacs when it comes to the writing, because a lot of the segments can be amazing. They can be hilarious and just downright incredible. But then there can be other segments that are actually just tremendously awful, and that's probably the nicest way of putting it. But I'd say that when it comes to how much of it was good versus how much is bad, I'd say about 70% of the entire series was great. 70% was great overall. And the other 30%, I wouldn't say is bad. I'd say it averages from decent to awful, which I guess can just correlate back to being bad, which, yeah, okay. Well, yeah, it's a little bit of a mixed bag of a series. Now, the question is, why is it bad? Well, of course, Animaniacs has always been the type of show that references the real world inside of its world. So you get a lot of jokes regarding society, regarding politics, regarding meme culture, regarding pop culture. It's like anything that you can think of from real life, the Animaniacs will mention in their show. But the thing is, the Animaniacs themselves have already mentioned that they can't really predict or know what's going to be relevant by the time their show comes out, because of course cartoons take a long time to make. So they try their best to make sure they don't make any outdated references, but while I'd say 60% of the reference humor is funny and actually relevant, 40% of it is very clearly outdated. I mean, I can't, honest, there's a Leroy Jenkins joke inside of one of the episodes. That is incredibly outdated. Some of you may not even know what Leroy Jenkins is. That's how outdated it is. But when it comes to jokes and when comedy writing, honestly, it's actually pretty good most of the time. Jokes, I'd say they land, again, 70% of the time the jokes will land and are hilarious. Then of course when it comes to adult comedy in the show, they can be actually pretty good, although sometimes I actually think it can be a little too heavy on adult jokes, a little bit too adult for a kid show. And they do mention that this is a kid show, even though it's meant to be enjoyed by kids and their parents. But of course, just because it's a kid show doesn't mean adults can't enjoy it too. That's kind of the point of their writing, and the Animaniacs mention that themselves in the show. But yeah, I feel like some of the jokes can be pretty inappropriate for kids. Like, wow. Okay, let's see. What else can I mention about the writing? Dot Warner is a little bit strange. I think she's probably the most changed for the worst of all the characters back for the reboot. For some reason, like I said before, Dot Warner hates men. So instead of like trying to be, you know, a feminist who wants equal rights for everyone, she's more like someone who just doesn't want rights for men, which is a little bit distracting because that's never really what her character was. In the original Animaniacs, she's smart, she's witty, like, you know, they don't have to say that she's witty, you just understand that she is. And she's honestly a little bit more mature sometimes compared to her brothers, even though she's the youngest one. But it's kind of like, yeah, it's not really funny when half of Dot's commentary is just that, oh, men suck in some way or another. Like, you didn't have to make her hate, like, a gender for her to be a feminist icon. She was a feminist icon already.
Now then, you see, Dot, when a man shoots. I don't need a mansplaining song about manspreading.
Now, when it comes to an improvement on characters compared to the original, I think when it comes to Pinky and the Brain, they have a lot of emotional connection moments that actually work pretty well. And the more I think about it, I feel like I don't understand why it feels like Pinky and the Brain had a lot more favoritism in the writing compared to the Warners, because Pinky and the Brain segments are at least twice as good overall compared to the Warner segments. And some of them are just downright phenomenal. Like, there was a Groundhog's Day parody in season 3, and that one was amazing. Like, I actually love that one quite a bit. Okay, I think you're understanding how my thoughts on the Animaniacs kind of describe what the show is like, because it's like you can bring up something good, but then you also have to bring up something bad, and you go back and forth. There's good and bad, and it's honestly kind of frustrating that this show couldn't decide to be good or more, well, it couldn't decide to be great or awful. It had to be a mixed bag completely. So, would I say that the Animaniacs was bad? No, it was actually pretty good at times. I will say it's not exactly the best. There is a lot of issues throughout the series. Of course, it does come to personal preference. This is, again, extremely divisive, which is frustrating that I have to keep repeating myself, but trust me, it's important to get that out of the way, because it's important to know that nobody's opinions on anything about this show are going to be the same. I don't know how they managed that. It's incredible. But you can tell a lot of care was put into the show from the people working on it. You can tell that they were Animaniacs fans when they were kids, and they did their absolute best to make sure that this reboot was as great as it could be. There is a lot of moments of just pure passion and heart and creativity that really do make the show feel a little bit more special than it probably would be if it was handled by people who just didn't care at all. Although I do say that apparently some of the executives behind the show actually didn't like the original Animaniacs, and they didn't even care about this reboot. In fact, they actually apparently actively hated the original Animaniacs, which doesn't fare well for Reboot. But when it comes to some of the writers and the animators and voice actors, you can tell that they love the Animaniacs and decided to make whatever they had work the best for the show. Now, when it comes to a grade regarding the overall series, you know, season 1, 2, and 3, I'm gonna give the series a resounding C+. A C+, which basically means you're a little bit above average. You're not great, you're not bad, you're not good all the time either. You're just fine with a little bit of extra goodness in there. And with all that being said, I hope you all enjoyed this video. And if you did, I hope you don't mind liking and subscribing. I'd really appreciate it. I hope you all have a wonderful day or night, depending on when you're watching this. And I must bid you adieu.